Call this meeting to order at 9:30, and we will move forward with roll call and determination of quorum.
Matthew Lehane.
Here.
Paul Aniello. Here. Jamie Jackson. Obama Bean.
Here.
Kathy Coffey. Adam Garrett. Melody Fowler. Amy Garbarini.
I'm online.
Thank you.
Morning, Amy.
Kate
Morning.
Gibson. Christine Hefner. Leon Hughes. Cassie Lord.
Here.
Daniel Koenig. Nick Miner.
Chris Clark online for King George.
Chris. Nick Ruiz.
Here.
Bob Schneider.
Online.
Thank you. Rodney White.
Here.
Ari. Lee Anderson. Benamar. Chelsea Bates. Mike Craig.
Here.
Brian Council. Shannon Fennell. Susan Gardner. Todd Horsley. Jacob Pasquick. Craig Pennington. Craig Reed. Joe Silsby. Yep.
Awesome, thank you. We'll move on to approval of the June 3rd, 2024 TAC meeting agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to a very quick review of the May 20th, 2024 policy committee meeting.
Yeah, I've cheated a little bit this time. I sent you not the policy committee link, but my administrator report presentation, because I think that's more of interest to you. You can always correct me if you're wrong, but I think the policy committee agenda you've all seen. So to rehash it is pointless. However, there's some interesting factoids in this one. Are we still the fastest growing region of Virginia? Well, Connor did some work for us. That was the old map that people used 2000 to 2019, and you can see the dark blue. We were the fastest growing planning district commission PDC in Virginia. And so I asked Connor to update that with new figures. So if you go to the next one, you'll see there that if you go from the year 2010 to 2023, we are again still the fastest growing PDC in Virginia by population. And you can see with the reds, they're actually losing population, right? So Southern and Western Virginia is losing population, and we are gaining population. And then I asked the question, well, what if we just look at the period during COVID? Was COVID different? Did that change things? So there's the 2019 to 2023 map, which is slightly different. You can see that places like Richmond's PDC is growing as well, but we are still ahead of all of the PDCs with the fastest growth rate in Virginia. So the two south and west of us are catching up. They've had increased growth during COVID, but even during COVID, we remained the fastest growing PDC. So frankly, you know, whichever way you cut the time period, we still remain the fastest growing region in Virginia, which is important to know when we're trying to apply for funds to build transit, to build roadways, to build whatever else, is that the population is not slowing down as a region, okay? Obviously, if you cut it by jurisdiction, there's going to be some winners and losers. It won't be quite the same pie, but we certainly, as a group, remain the fastest growing PDC region in Virginia, which I think is important.
Quick question. Is Virginia still growing?
Yes, it grew, but based off of migration,
Okay.
not births and deaths.
There's not a lot of growth in Virginia. It's debatable, actually. Depends when you cut the pie.
That's true.
Because some years it's not actually growing.
Yeah.
Some years it might actually have lost population.
Yeah.
So the state is not growing very fast, but our region is, because you can see the red is lost
And
population.
I
right?
think just an interesting factoid, if you go all the way back to 1960, Jersey is the fastest growing PDC still. So
Yeah, yeah, it just remains. And I guess it's partly because we're in between DC and Richmond, and therefore the land value is lower, and therefore it's less costly to build housing.
Well, is there anything else in this presentation you wanted to go through?
Next. Just this article, I won't read the whole thing to you, but the exodus from the cities has stopped. People are now moving back into the big cities. So DC has actually grown in population in the last 12 months. And so have the other big cities in the country, including Detroit, surprisingly. For the first time in like 40 years, Detroit's population actually grew. But southern cities have particularly grown in population size recently. I won't read the whole article for you there, the slides. Next. This is an important one that I wanted to point out to you. I briefly started murmurings about this at the last meeting, but I asked, is there a better way to allocate CMAC and SDGB funds that doesn't involve such complicated process and some, tensions and blood pressure raised every cycle? And I looked at the MBTA system, and they have a slightly different way of doing this. Next slide. They do two things quite differently. They ask each jurisdiction to rank the priority of their own applications. So they don't use the score at the, well, they're not an MPO, but at the regional level, they don't use the score to prioritize the projects. They let each jurisdiction say, this is my first priority projects, this is my second priority, this is my third one, this is my fourth one. And then the funding they fund according to the jurisdiction's priorities. And then the second thing they do is that they allocate the funds to the jurisdictions based on a formula, not based on the score of the project. So they set a formula, and the formula gives you the same percentage every year, depending on how much money VDOT allocates to us to disperse. So let's say you get 23% every year, then whatever money VDOT gives to us, we calculate 20% of that, and then we prioritize, we take that money and we assign it to the projects from your jurisdiction, starting with your first priority, then your second priority, then your third priority. So it gives the jurisdictions much more control over the funds, rather than the MPO having to use some sort of a scoring system. And then you always want to change the scoring system because you see the results from the year before or the cycle before, and then you think it's given too much to X and not enough to Y, and then so we spend all our time changing the scoring package. I would rather that we think about the way they've done it. I shared this with the policy committee. They seem very interested in the idea. So we're going to work, and we've got 2 years, because we said we're not going to do allocations next year, but we can see how we can put together a formula to give some sort of a fair allocation across the 3 jurisdictions. I made the point in the policy committee that if we only look at population, then Fredericksburg will get screwed every cycle. So we can't only look at population. So maybe we look at population plus lane miles plus something for transit, or I don't know. We're going to look at different formula options and make some presentations over the next 6 months and see what you feel, see what the policy committee feels, see if we can find some sort of consensus that a kind of fair allocation to the jurisdictions. Did you want to say?
You just answered my question. I was going to ask how they allocate the formula, how it's constructed.
They only use population. I don't think that will work for us.
So just a question on this. I know like Richmond tried this at one point, and Federal Highway said you weren't allowed to do sub-allocations by jurisdiction. Like if we got an approval from Federal Highway to do kind of different system.
So they've allowed Northern Virginia to use their system. So I can't see how they can turn us down if they're allowing it at the MBTA. It's
yeah.
not, you don't not score, right? You still score the projects, but they allocate the funds based on population, not on.
Well, not too much of a discussion to get into today, because we do have a long agenda. Quick question.
Just real quick, am I understanding correctly with NBTA, they also have project type restrictions? So like, even though a jurisdiction can say, oh, we want to allocate this much money to this project and then do the prioritization, you still can't allocate money to certain projects that would fall outside of the CMAC or STBG.
Yep.
And that's how they do it, right? So that's not funding highway projects, which.
So we would still do the scoring anyway.
Yeah.
but the scoring would be A, to screen in projects, and B, to make sure that you're meeting the federal requirements. So you still have to show that there's a congestion relief, that there's a air quality improvement,
Yeah.
that there's all those criteria. You still have to meet all the federal requirements. You can't get around the federal requirements. You have to meet them all. But it just allows you to allocate not based on the score. You allocate based on a formula rather than the score.
One last question, and then we need to move
I don't
on.
want to get into debate on those. The issues, I wouldn't want us to do a whole bunch of work.
Work and then find out
And
we
then
can't do
federal
it.
highway says you can't do this. So really, I mean, VDOT, Bentley,
So-
you need to check.
So let me reach out to Ivan and others at Federal Highways and see how they approve the Northern Virginia one.
All right, Ian, anything further?
No, I think
Okay.
that's it.
All right, we'll move on to public comment. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time, and staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. Is there anyone in this room who would like to make public comments? Anyone online who would like to make public comments? All right, and then I believe we have an item for staff, multiple items for staff to read out.
This is from Larry Gross. I've been a FAMPO appointed Spotsylvania at-large member of CDAC for the better part of the last 20 years. In that time, I've supported virtually all, if not every, road proposals from FAMPO. In that same period, I've also supported 100% of Spotsylvania proposals, including many true connecting roads like Levels, Harrison, the Spotsylvania Parkway, as well as South Point Parkway. I've not opposed any project that Spotsylvania supported. I've supported improvements to I-95, CD lanes, Route 3 and Route 1 Massaponax, as well as a new interchange at Harrison Road. My positions have been and continue to be 100% in accordance with Spotsylvania County's stated positions that address both Spotsylvania needs and FAMPO regional needs. I very much support the smart scale concept. It's not yet fully optimized and has flaws, but using a standardized process to develop and rate all proposals on a competitive basis and let the ones that best meet the required performance, efficiency, and cost effectiveness standards is a good process in my opinion. If a NEPA study, including FHWA VDOT traffic modeling, demonstrates a net benefit to Spotsylvania and the region for route crossing, and the county leadership agrees, I will support it also. Until then, I remain a heavy skeptic that the current proposal will actually benefit Spotsylvania or the region. In my mind, a good performing connecting road diverts existing traffic from other nearby roads, reducing congestion on those roads and does not induce new trips. I'm more than happy to respond to any questions on my past and present role in FAMPO. I strongly support a regional approach to transportation for the MPO mission. I favor the individual counties also pursuing their own priorities themselves and through FAMPO when appropriate and part of a regional perspective. Very respectfully, Larry Gross. And that concludes the public comments received.
Thank you. All right, move on to the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda: the May 6, 2024 TAC meeting minutes, resolution 2441, 2442, and 2443 with regard to the tip. Are there any comments, questions at this time? We have a motion for approval. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, move on to action and discussion items. So we'll jump into the Virginia Port Authority.
Chris, thanks for coming down.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your expediting. You're moving quick here, so thank you for this opportunity. I'm not sure where the best place is to stand, but I'll try to stand over here. First, I wanted to say, introduce myself and thank you for this. I'm Chris Gullickson, Director of Development and Transportation Policy at the Port of Virginia. And I thought even the opening comments about growth and growing regions, and obviously, I think the port, we of course support areas that we typically think down in the harbor but the fact of the matter is that growth that's taking place is not isolated into one particular region here in the Commonwealth. It is spread obviously throughout. And so in our efforts to be very proactive and working outside our gates, definitely try to get in front of TPOs and areas where we see concentration of freight. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to give this update. And hopefully I'll leave some time at the end so we can have some Q&A and I can hopefully dive into more transportation specific related concerns or questions you all might have. So we'll go next slide, please. Just give a quick overview of who is the Port of Virginia. What is the Port of Virginia? Well, we really are made up of 6 terminals spread throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our 4 primary facilities do happen to reside down in the Hampton Roads Harbor. Our primary business is containers. We move shipping containers. We do it very, very well. We're the 3rd largest container port on the entire East Coast. We have grown significantly over the past 5 years. Some of that obviously tied to pandemic growth, but we're really proving ourselves here in Virginia as a nimble, fluid port. And that's obviously been seen in the recent months in light of the tragic events in Baltimore and how we've played a role of support in alleviating some of the freight concerns that obviously resulted from the bridge collapse and keeping the supply chain moving fluidly. So we have the 4. I mentioned the 4. I just wanted to point out we do have 2 inland facilities. We have one in Richmond, which is south of downtown. So you may have seen that facility. That's a barge port. And then, in fact, if you're up on 66 heading west, you've seen a sign and always probably been curious, what is an inland port? We do run a Virginia inland port in Front Royal, and that's a rail port. And so that's served by Norfolk Southern, double stacked rail service up there into the northern Shenandoah Valley. And I tell you, that's a neat operation that was built back in the late 80s. It truly was a time where that infrastructure was thought to be, if you build it, maybe business will come. And today there's $1 billion of capital investment, 40,000 containers, 7,000 jobs. And obviously that part of Virginia has seen a lot of growth similar to this region from being a suburb, exurb of the DC metropolitan area. And so it's been interesting to see that happen over time with industry growth and the residential growth that's taking place in that part of the state. Go ahead, next slide. Structurally, how is Virginia, the Port of Virginia structured? Well, we kind of coined a term during the pandemic called the Virginia model. Some ports like New York, New Jersey, of course, that port authority is massive. It's like a huge real estate trust, right? They're in so many different activities. They own ports, they have an airport, they have a huge police force, they own real estate. If you go down in southern states and states like Virginia and South, it's more of an owner-operator model, meaning the Commonwealth of Virginia owns the port facilities, and subsequently we have a sister company called Virginia International Terminals, who's actually running the day-to-day operations with our labor partners, which of course on the waterfront you have international longshoremen, and so they're hiring the ILA members there on a daily basis, as well as marketing the port itself to customers as entering in commercial contracts with our direct customer, which are the steamship lines, ocean carriers. The names that are on the side of the containers is really our direct tie from a revenue perspective and how we, as the Virginia Port Authority, sustain ourselves as a self-sustaining, revenue-generating entity here in Virginia. We also integrate massive amounts of technology. As we all know, data is a big deal in any form of transportation. Very much in container movement, we are on the forefront of integrating technology, as well as being, when I see assets equipment, we are a semi-automated container handling facility. That's a mouthful, but really what that means is that in our yard, where the containers are moving from the marine side, the water side, to the land side to leave either on a truck or a train, there's a lot of automation taking place where we at the Port of Virginia and Inland Commonwealth have invested tremendously in the densification of a stack yard that enables for a higher use and more fluidity and movement of freight, again, from international sort of point of gateway coming off a ship out to commerce. We'll go to the next slide. We have to measure ourselves. We use an acronym in the shipping business called TEU, 20-foot equivalent unit. In fact, you can sort of see the pandemic and obviously all of the tragedy and challenges that came with it. Came with a lot of disruption. And in that moments of disruption is where Virginia and the Port of Virginia really shined. And so I talked just a second ago about technology, automation, being able to have idle capacity or available capacity based on sound investing by the Commonwealth of Virginia into the port facilities really enabled for us to bring on tremendous amount of freight during a 2-year period, which in our business growth is 3 to 5. If you had a 5% year-over-year growth, that's amazing. And then we had 25% growth in 2 years. That is unheard of. And so if we hadn't, as a state, been investing, we wouldn't have been able to handle this growth. We've come off we'll say the height 3.7 million TEUs, sort of riding the wave down in 2023. We will be up a little bit to flat, obviously based on the current economy. And then we have seen obviously a little bit of an uptick in supporting Baltimore. Go ahead, next slide. What does that mean to us? And this is the so what factor. You know, we obviously want to demonstrate volume and sustaining and investing in infrastructure, but really what's that economic impact here to the Commonwealth of Virginia? And this is sort of statewide impacts that the port is inducing. And so, of course, this is looking at our 22 over our 21 fiscal year numbers. So tonnage is obviously up, but really the jobs, 1 in 10 jobs throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia tie back to Port of Virginia activity. And when I say Port of Virginia, you know, there are a bunch of terminals along our waterways. It's a massive infrastructure. When I say the port, in my case, I'm really referring to the 6 terminals. I'm not referring to the 70 private terminals that are up and down these waterways, but really the Port of Virginia is touching 1 in 10 jobs. And of course, state and local taxes is one that always is recognized as being critically important to provide, again, more benefit and value to the communities we impact. Next slide, please. We've got to continue to invest, and that's something the Commonwealth, you know, is doing on transportation throughout the network, and our network and system down in the harbor is none different. And so we have about a $1.4 billion gateway investment program currently underway. This is really to enable us as the port to stay on the forefront of opportunities and not to, you know, in a way, continue to grow, but not grow our capacity. It's a long game play, as we all know in infrastructure, and it's none different in the port. If you don't have capacity, you can't grow. And so we're taking steps here in the Commonwealth. Like I said, 1.4 billion currently under investment or under planned investment as we speak. I'm gonna highlight a couple of those projects. The first one is the dredging. This is a big deal. This is all water side. This is a cost sharing project with the Army Corps of Engineers, represents $450 million, half funded by the Commonwealth, half funded by the Army Corps. This is to bring our channels to what are already very deep. We have 50 feet of water. Some of these coasts, we're going deeper and wider. In fact, the widening is already done. And that's critically important for the two-way transit of ultra large container ships. The Dahlia in Baltimore, that is a ULCV. That is a common vessel that we see sailing these waters today. And having the two-way transit enables obviously for an increase of immediate capacity and time savings. Time is money in the shipping world. And so just by having a two-way transit, we're able to add about 15% time saving to our customer, but ultimately bringing in the bigger and deeper ships, which I'm not saying they're coming today or tomorrow, but again, long game knowing they're not building small ships. They're only building these ultra large container vessels. And as the fleet size in the globe gets larger, Virginia wants to be a port capable of bringing in those ships to continue to support trade and commerce. Next slide. I do want to touch on the Richmond Marine Terminal. You know, at $1.4 billion, it's a huge number, but this particular facility is interesting. And it does in fact support a few businesses in this region, believe it or not, that are companies that are deciding, hey, I'm going to bring my boxes in containers through the Richmond Marine Terminal. And rather than having to send drivers all the way down to Norfolk or Portsmouth, you know, we can go down to 95 here and pick up our containers. And so this facility is seeing some continued investment. The one that's it's a minor investment, but one that I think has a high payout, and that is we've stood up a sort of 24-hour drop lot. And so again, companies that are here in this region that are, you know, running 24/7 operations are able to deploy their truck drivers, you know, so it's a Value City Furniture, Lidl, to go down and have containers pre-staged to pick them up off gate hours, which again does help. As we know, the trucking and the freight movement space is somewhat different than the commuting patterns of basic, you know, people going to offices and jobs. So that's a pretty big deal. And I think it's just being stood up and implemented as we speak. I think it's about 60 days old at this point. And we'll get to see more, I think, adaptation in trucking companies begin to, again, utilize off-peak hours to move freight in and out of Richmond Marine Terminal. Next slide, please. And then I'll just touch on the big project. This $650 million project. Again, more of this sort of what we call optimization and automation. And so continuing to extract some of the more manual functions and implementing these rail-mounted gantry cranes. Just tell you, if you guys want to make a field trip, you always have an open invite to come down to see the facility, because it's great to be here in Fredericksburg. I love it, but I would love to have you guys, you know, see it firsthand. So if you get a chance, and I'll leave some cards and hang out after the meeting, seeing this operation and just the enormous nature and how massive what we're talking about is. You can see it firsthand, and this is a $650 million project. This project is underway. It'll begin to net new capacity for us during the second half, most likely of next year, and be finished in 2027. And next slide. And this will bring our total throughput capacity about 5.86 million TEUs. If you recall a couple slides back, we had about 3.7 was our best year ever. So again, having that sort of, we'll call wiggle room to go out to the marketplace to sell the product, but more importantly, support the Virginia companies that obviously locating and investing here is critically important. Next slide. And so, just like I talked about, it's a statewide. This is not just a Hampton Roads or just a Richmond or just a Front Royal, but we have a presence throughout the entire Commonwealth. And that's something we pride ourselves in. That's why we're out as a team, working with our partners, if it's from the economic development space, or if it's from the planning development space, or in the transportation space. We feel we can lend a voice as a stakeholder, as a partner in some of these projects to improve and enhance the Virginia supply chain. And so what does that look like? There's a boom, as we know in this region, we know in Richmond, and we know in Hampton Roads. There's a tremendous onslaught of new speculative development that's underway. And that's a space that we saw sort of ramping up right in the beginning of COVID and really hasn't leveled off too much. And especially in this region, as I stand here, there's some big projects currently underway that would, fall into the active development, active spec warehouse development space. So this is just a snapshot of Hampton Roads. It represents about 11 million square feet. Next slide, please. This next slide is the Richmond market. Obviously it runs sort of up to Ashland, and that's about, 7 million square feet. And truly, this is an area where we as a port want to lend a voice. Again, if it's from giving more insight into the planners, working with communities on comp plans, which a number of communities are going through their revamps as we speak, and making sure that freight and port-related freight is understood and being evaluated when looking at future land use decisions. Subsequently, we're working with a lot of different TPOs, especially in Hampton Roads and in Richmond, on areas of, again, enhancing, improving upon some of the roadway infrastructure that has tiebacks to the port, and trying to eliminate some of those choke points, because we're all experiencing those. But again, being proactive in the space is where myself and Barbara Nelson, maybe some of you know Barb from her time in Richmond, and she's now been at the port 5-6 years, and trying again to leverage some of her understanding of the transportation process, matched with some of my experience in development, to again be out in that space, supporting those elected, those in county leadership, and those in planning to hopefully better understand and make sound decisions, even if not in our favor, but understanding the full picture and the benefits that come with port active development. Next slide. And so that kind of plays into our integrated freight strategy. Obviously down at Hampton Roads, we have a $5 billion plus transportation package underway as we speak. HRBT, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, makes up a big portion of that, over $5 billion of money being spent to enhance capacity. But that really, doesn't just stop. It also includes the gap, of course, there on 64, and then leading up 95 to the fast lanes, and just continued improvements here in Northern Virginia, as we do see sort of these heat maps, and you can kind of obviously see the tonnage and how it moves 64 to 95 and back and forth. We also have an east-west focus. 58 is a critical corridor along the southern part of the Commonwealth, out to areas like Danville and Martinsville. And so we continue to keep our eye on that space. And of course, even though we're far away from 81, 81 is obviously a point of say issues of congestion, right? And areas to enhance and improve upon, adding more capacity for that north-south freight moving through the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So we are also doing some, I would say, forward-leaning, especially from a port. We've got a carbon, zero carbon, net zero carbon statement of 2040, really targeting 2033. So we have really been within becoming a resilient port and taking climate action to heart. Next slide, please. And so this sort of just shows sort of a chart on how we're removing carbon emissions out of our operation. Again, targeting a sort of 2033. We've already begun to purchase all electricity we use at our ports from renewable sources. So we have sort of that virtual PPA with Dominion Energy to be purchasing some of the solar energy that they're producing, as well up in the northern Shenandoah Valley at the co-op up there. We have an agreement in place. We'll continue to focus on that. We in fact just submitted a very significant EPA grant under the Clean Ports grant program that EPA stood up. And again, to continue to look at ways to implement different carbon-free ways of moving cargo and freight. Of course, a lot of battery operation at this point in the first phases, but we're looking at all aspects of how, as a port, we're going to remove carbon and become a greener, more sustainable operation. And so it's, again, something we're out there we're talking it up, but we're actually doing it. A lot of those big companies that are our big direct customers like Amazon, Target, Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, they have very public statements around sustainability. And so for us as a port to continue to strengthen that ability, product offering to those customers, I think it makes us a better port for a lot of different reasons. We're proud of it. Next slide. Cool. So like I said, I was going to go quick speaks. I want to leave on maybe a question or two at the end. I want to respect your agenda, of course, and timing. So I'll stop here to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, question. You said you're looking to increase capacity for the ports. How do you tackle the increase in contamination you're adding more trucking to move this thing?
Yeah, so we have 3 ways to primarily move our freight on and off. So I'll start with the barge, which runs between here in Richmond, here in Baltimore, and here in Philadelphia is a single digit. Then we move a lot of rail. Now, in this market, front row will be the closest rail. So that's, not as much carbon for tonnage. Rail is a very, efficient way to move freight. And then on the actual majority, so over 60% of the freight that leaves our terminal does leave on a truck. And so we have a couple programs currently in place that are funded through the TPO down at Hampton Roads, through CMAQ funds. And that's a green operator program. So we work with the motor carriers, the trucking companies, because we don't own the trucks. That's all independent, but working at ways to either do diesel replacement. So trying to, retire some of those older tractors and even some of the older engines to a more, sustainable, cleaner engine, as that's what's available technology wise. We do have an EV element, and we have some motor carriers who are in the exploratory phase and looking at what might be available or possible. I mean, I think if you're tracking the Class 8 tractor trailer, truck in the EV space, there are a lot of options, and with those come some challenges. But on the local, so the short haul move, it could work. And so we have a couple of trucking companies that are truly looking at how to put in the necessary charging infrastructure, and they have a book of business that, in a way, enables them to take on a heavier tractor, because you're working within restrictions of technology and restrictions of the roadway, right? There are heavyweight permits. We can move heavy in Virginia, but at some point, if you're loading your truck up with batteries, that's not paying the same as the cargo, right? So it's interesting. We'll see it, and I think it's going to be multiple waves of technology. I think we'll continue to see some of those bridge fuels like compressed natural gas, CNG, and other fuels like that also being implemented in fleets. I know Amazon has a number of tractors running under that fuel source, and we'll get there.
Thank you.
But yeah, the technology it's
2 quick ones. Which is the corridor that you send, not you, but that your users most use to move containers out of the port? Are you going up 95 or to 81 or south? And then the second question is, do you know what the current cost is to move one container to China?
Sure. So I'll do the first question first, and the second one have to get back to you. But the first one, if you look at 58, so State Route 58, which is an east-west, and State Route 460, which is sort of a north-south, those 2 corridors are significant from a tonnage perspective. And so they're handling probably more tonnage than 64 alone. So, but it is definitely almost very 50-50 split where you have freight going west and south, and then you have freight going north and east up this corridor. And so it's a pretty balanced out for the local move. And then the cargo, the shipping rates have leveled out. I mean, I can tell you, this isn't anecdotal, this is what it was. I mean, during the height of the pandemic, there are furniture accounts paying upwards of $20,000 a container to bring it from Far East to Virginia. And typically that was in the 3,000 to 4,000, that was the budget going into that year, and all of a sudden rates, And so it's leveled out, and I think you're probably back in that 3 to 4. There has been a little bit of an uptick in some of the Asian freight, as we start to get, believe it or not, into our peak seasons here, for back to school, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. It's here before we know it. And so you do see those spot market rates, but it's come back. I mean, thankfully, because that 20,000, 15 to 20,000 per container rate obviously wasn't sustainable, but that's what was being charged for well over a year during the.
Jump to
What's
last
the,
question and then.
rail mode share right now?
So rail is about 36%.
Increasing, decreasing?
Increasing, and I'll tell you, we're doing very well. When you start, I mentioned earlier, third largest on the East Coast for overall volume, but we have a very nice position when we look at intermodal rail freight as being top East Coast. And so that's a real testament to our relationship with CSX and Norfolk Southern, having on-dock loading, doing it very quickly, and then having those networks to get us to Cleveland, so Cincinnati, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, Memphis. These are major hubs of commercial activity, and we've got that direct tie.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for coming up today. We truly appreciate it, and the presentation. I know you've been up here before, so thank you for coming back.
And I'll stick around after the meeting if anyone wants to chat. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we'll jump on to our next presentation as well. Similar, quick, and we'll do it.
All right, I'll just stand up here too as well. You have my slides, right?
Yeah.
Apologies, my voice, I'm getting over a little something, not contagious, but a little hoarse. So, wanted to come back to you all this morning and just a culmination of almost 2 years of analysis and review on an update of VRE's system plan. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. A lot of these slides are fronts matter that you guys have already seen before in some form or fashion, so we'll kind of expedite through. But just for the folks who are not as familiar, don't remember the last time I presented on the system plan, we have traditionally done system plans about once every 10 years. We're going to do them a lot sooner, or a lot, at much shorter intervals going forward, because things are changing a lot faster now. The last one we did was in 2014, and I don't need to convince anyone in this room that a lot of stuff has changed since 2014. This presentation's dovetailed nicely with some of the discussions that we've had, this morning regarding the intense growth that's occurring in this region. And so, kind of on the other side of the coin from the commercial and the freight growth, you've got population growth, where Fredericksburg region is projected to grow by 65% in population by 2050. Contrast that with Northern Virginia. And when I say Northern Virginia, I mean, I'm talking like, NBTA jurisdictions, only 35% growth. So this region, it's going to have a lot more housing, but the regional models are showing that the employment growth is still projected to increase, primarily in high capacity transit corridors and in the region's core up in the DC area. So, 65% more houses, but not 65% more jobs in Fredericksburg. So people are going to be out migrating, and that's where VRE, commuter rail comes in as a viable option to get people, to where they need to go. I think it should be noted that at one point you could have said maybe that Northern Virginia ends at the Occoquan River. That is not the case. I don't think it's for 20 or 30 years. And so transit improvements down here are going to benefit people in every jurisdiction up the line. And I just want to also say that we've got telework trends that we're observing are kind of falling into a new normal of a slightly higher elevated level of telework than pre-pandemic, even with some of the rollbacks in the more liberal telework policies at the federal and at the state level. And then, of course, we've got transforming rail in Virginia, which is going to allow the Commonwealth and partners such as VRE, Amtrak, CSX to add capacity to the RF&P corridor between here and DC. By 2030, that's going to allow us to run 63% more VRE trains than we do today. Let's move along to the next slide. You guys have seen this before. I believe I presented this about last year. This was our system plan vision. This is what guided all of the screening and analysis of the different scenarios that we developed and reviewed with our stakeholder partners and our internal group. If you move to the next slide, we had a set of 4 goals that we also used in the screening and scenario refinement process. I just want to point out this goal right here. I mean, safety, like we're not going to do anything that's not safe, right? That's the, rail is inherently, the safest way to move people from point A to point B, by far. And so any new service we're going to put out, it's going to be a safe service. But, secondary to that is reliability. And we get questions all the time. Well, what about weekend service? What about more, midday service, more reverse flow service? One of the challenges that we're going to be facing in the next, I would say probably 10 years, is there's a lot of infrastructure that's going to need to get built in the corridor that's already planned and funded, but it's going to need to get built to enable us to run that service at or above the level of performance, on-time performance that we currently run today. So it is not in our best interest to start adding trains to a network that's already overburdened. You're a rail rider, frequently up and down from Alexandria, the trains can be late, 30, 20 hours, sometimes more. That is not the way that we attract more people to VRE to be longtime riders. So, and then, all these other things are equally as important, but, we had to order them somehow. So also, by the way, stop me if you have a question. I'm not going to do the questions at the end, just for expediency. So if you really have a question, just raise your hand and I'll pause. Go ahead to the next slide. You guys have also seen some form of this, but we started this process as a 3-phase planning process, and we're in the 3rd and final phase. We actually wrapped up all of our analysis around about April of this year. And so what you'll see in the final plan document when it's released after our operations board and the commissions adopt the plan later this year is a story map, essentially with all of the information, from the beginning, the middle to the end, all 3 phases. All 3 phases of analysis, and accompanied by a set of technical. So for the more technical folks in this room, folks need a little more information to perform analyses at the MPO level. That's a quick email to me. Hey, I see this, it's referenced at a high level, let me know, and I'll be able to, send you that information, the source file for that information. Moving on to the next slide. So this is kind of where we think we're going to be able to be in a couple of years, in 2030. As I mentioned before, TRV is going to allow us to run more trains. That TRV service increase is tied to key pieces of infrastructure that CSX, Amtrak, VRE, Commonwealth are all funding partners in. We're going to be able to run up to 14 round trips on the Fredericksburg line by 2030. So right now there's 8 round trips running between this region and DC. We'll be able to run 14. We'll be able to run a weekend service, full weekend service on Saturday and Sunday, which will be a tremendous, I think, benefit in addition to the network, to the transit system. We'll be able to run a limited amount of reverse flow services, so serving residents of the Northern Virginia and the DC markets that are employed in this region. And we'll also be able to, among other infrastructure improvements, we'll be able to allow some of those trains to skip stop. That's something that we only do with one of our trains, our first morning train out, train 300. But we'll be able to do that a little more robustly by 2030 to respond to really two things. So when we did a market assessment earlier or later last year, we determined that one of the largest deterrents from riding VRE, besides reliability issues, is travel time. And you think, oh my God, travel time. takes so long to drive up 95 when it's congested, how can that be? But when you really dig into the data, you know, somebody coming from southern Spotsylvania, driving to the Spotsylvania train station, getting on a local train that makes 10 or 11 stops before they get on, it's a long ride. It's an hour and 40 minutes. So if we can do everything we can to, you know, add more express trains to the network to serve this region, that will have, you know, it's not a exponential increase in demand, but there's real demand that we are likely to see from them. So that's 2030. Does anyone have any questions about, you know, 2030? Really, the key takeaways, it's 14 round trips, it's you know, 7 round trips on the weekends, the 26 daily train system wide. Some express trains, some, you know, a new station at Potomac Shores, although that I'll say that's a station that's being developed by a developer. That's not something that VRE is funding. And then, you know, expanded yard facilities. Questions on that? No. All right. So now even more interesting, 2050 scenario. So this is our vision. We're calling it in the plan, the service vision for Virginia Railway Express in the next 25 years. I'll note before I go into the specifics here that everything's incremental, right? So TRV is going to let us get to 2030. You know, we're not just going to flip a switch in 2 or 3 years and all of a sudden be doing this, right? It's going to be a stair-step incremental approach between 2030 and 2050. But we really feel that this concept of operation for both the Fredericksburg and the Manassas lines is what the region deserves and what the demand will support. You know, when you consider the population growth, employment growth, the increase in congestion. So specifically, that's a peak period, peak direction train every 20 minutes, so 3 trains an hour on the Fredericksburg line going north, and a train every half hour coming south in the peak period. So that's the peaks, right? Off peak and on the weekends, we're proposing to run a train every hour in both directions. For the service spans that are generally listed in the upper left-hand corner there by the calendar item. So a little note about this service plan. You'll notice it is still heavily peaked, you know, service. We did look at some scenarios that flattened out the peaks and provided a more, you know, a more unified or uniform level of service across the service day. We actually found that that wouldn't work for us. There is still projected to be a significant amount of peak period, peak direction travel, even 25 years from now. But that just is a function of the administrative and office white collar type jobs that are concentrated in a very small geographic area in DC and at some other DoD installation, you know, nodes around our region. And we don't see that changing significantly in the next 20 years. So we want to continue to respect that peak. And then we also want to build in service at other times to provide kind of a lifeline of service to folks who are not doing the, you know, briefcase trip to work, right? And then one of the, I think, really cool components of this alternative or this scenario rather is adding in an express train every hour in the peak periods. So there'll be a sense of regularity that, you know, one of those 3 trains will be a train that skips some stops. So, you know, think of like a clock face schedule where the train leaves at the 0, at the 20, at the 40. In a perfect world, you know, one of those 3 might be a train that, you know, gets you to your destination about 10 minutes. So all in all, that's, you know, 29 round trips per line, you know, 3 times more service than what we operate today. And, you know, a considerable increase in the span of service and in the frequency. So any questions on that? Yes.
How did what Amtrak is providing factor into your plan?
That is an excellent question. So in 2030, a lot, right? So we know we can't run an unlimited amount of trains in the next 6 years. So we're going to be relying on Amtrak and the Step Up program, which is where VRE multi-ride ticket customer can purchase a ticket at a nominal fee to ride an Amtrak train. We're going to be relying on that to provide us additional capacity. We've actually set up, I'm not going to bore you with all of the messy schedule details and operations planning details, but we've set up a concept of operations that basically has has us not operating when Amtrak operates to, basically respect them. However, when we get to 2050, we're providing a robust enough level of service that we kind of stand on our own. And so we're not really like Amtrak's there, but we're relieving Amtrak of their, of their duty to carry our customers. And we're basically, doing that kind of short haul, and Amtrak is doing the long haul, the interstate. So, excellent question.
As soon as you do those reverse commute trains, I'll switch from Amtrak to VRE.
We welcome your patriotism. Yeah.
Gotta get it.
Next slide, please. So, just briefly, the plan is going to go into a lot of details on the benefits. And so I think one of our former board members, actually, Mr. Kelly from Fredericksburg, he used to say things like, I never tell people what something is going to cost and ask, is that worth it? You're always going to tell people, here are the benefits, here's what we want, right? Here's what we can get. Now here's what it costs. Is it? And so that's kind of how the plan is structured. It's gonna show, the benefits enumerated and actually, quantified and monetized in many cases to the region and to the traveling public. And then we'll talk about the capital costs and the potential operating costs. So if you move to the next slide, I've got some of those key, enumerations here on the slide. And so there's a lot of numbers here, but I would just focus on this column right here, because this is the aggregate of both the induced and the, existing or natural, trips by 2050 with that 2050 level of service. So for the entire operating region, with that level of service, VRE could reduce or avoid 51 billion miles in annual VMT. Commuter rail is extremely good at VMT avoidance and greenhouse gas reduction because the average trip length is like 30 to 35 miles. So, that's a lot of emissions per trip. $16.7 million in annual operating, vehicle operating cost savings. So that's like money back into people's pockets because they're buying a ticket, cost of the ticket less the cost of driving. And that difference, is what you've got there. And then of course, significant annual hours of travel delay and CO2 avoided in terms of metric tons. I just want to point out one thing here because it's pertinent to this region. We got some data from DRPT from their statewide rail plan on just how much benefit the RFP rail corridor provides to the Commonwealth in terms of freight benefit, not passenger, just freight. And it's $157 million in 2030, but in 2020 dollars, right? So basically the mental game here is if you literally deleted the RFP rail corridor, no rail corridor now, port's still running, the commerce is still flowing, things still need to get where they need to go. What increase in truck trips would that result on the parallel roadways? And that's the number right there, 4,180 additional daily truck trips on 95 coming through this region, with the deletion of the rail network. So, for the Discovery Channel minded folks here, that's end to end, and one lane of trucks, solid, like end to end from cab to tail, for 57 miles. That's like the Pentagon all the way down to Spotsylvania. So not just passenger benefits here, by making improvements to the rail corridor, people can get to work, but freight's still flowing. So, next slide. Really, what this plan centers on is reimagining what VRE is as a transit agency in 2050. We're not just a niche, federal employee commuter shuttle. We're the region's transportation spot. Because imagine in the future, you've got people who are still choosing to live, fastest growing region in the state, right? They're choosing to live in Spotsy, it's cheaper, bigger house, bigger land, whatever. But they don't want to drive to DC every day because that's still where their job is. So taking an FXB Go bus to the Spotsy station, they're getting on a VRE train, and then they're going to LaFont, and then, they're still a little bit too far from the LaFont station, so they're getting on Metro, right? So that's 3 transit trips or 3 transit vehicles that they've been on. That's really hard to do today. Most people don't want to do that. Because the connections are poor or non-existent. But with 20-minute headways, with a reliable service, with faster service, more and more of those trips become possible. Another thing I'll say, we are envisioning, even before 2050, I think we might be able to explore some options in the 2030 time horizon. You'll notice the orange lines here on the map. Being able to partner with existing regional bus transit providers, agnostic of name, to provide service to communities farther south than ours, right? So your Caroline counties of the world, your Hanover counties of the world that are growing but don't have the population density, the nodes, or quite frankly, the local revenue to be able to support expansions of VRE service. We did look at that. That was an alternative that we considered. How much would it cost if we actually continue to expand VRE beyond Spotsylvania? We don't feel that that's a cost-effective strategy for us as we're focusing on our core. But bus can do it, and it can do it very nimbly and, from a capital perspective, very cheap.
Nick, if you don't mind speeding up a little bit.
Yes, certainly. All right. So I already talked about this, so we can skip on to this slide here, skip to the next slide. 2024 capital costs. I'm just, if anyone has any specific questions on this, this will be enumerated in the plan, but we're projecting, at the most conservative sense, $359 million in additional capital expenditures required by 2050. This is above and beyond what is already planned and funded in 2030. So, next slide. This is just how the fleet growth is, is going to need to look in the next 26 years. I won't go into the specifics of this unless somebody has questions, but the takeaway for both rolling stock coaches and locomotives is two things. They're expensive to buy. Well, actually, really three things. They're expensive to buy. We don't have a lot of good funding sources to buy them right now. And we're going to need a lot of them if we're going to run a more robust service. So just keep that in mind. And then, moving on to the next slide, that's locomotive. And then let's move to operating. This is the penultimate slide, Matthew. So just looking at if we kept all of our existing regional, statewide, federal funding sources the same, all the formulas were the same, all the contributions were the same, and we started to increase service beyond 2030, what would that get us in terms of operating revenue? So 473 million in annual operating revenue in 2050, but 884 million in annual operating costs in 2030. So a fairly significant shortfall that will need to be addressed if we're going to grow to run this 20-minute headway service in 1 hour, off-peak service. The right-hand slide here, or the right-hand side of the slide here, details the ridership increases that we're projecting. So pre-pandemic, we were running about 4 million people a year. By 2050, with that increase in service, over 8 million people, becoming far more relevant to far more people, albeit at a higher cost, annual operating cost, higher annual operating revenue too. But, this is something that in the next couple of years, we're going to really need to dig into because the plan was not funding or implementation plan, it was really a visioning plan. Where that additional funding is going to come from, if the region, if the Commonwealth desires this level of service, is to be determined. So my final slide that I'll leave you with here is to talk about the growth in average daily weekday, travel. Right now, we're doing about 7,800 people a day system-wide. I mean, look at how much more we could be doing with that increase in service by 2050. 28,000 average daily rides just on the weekday. So 262% increase, with that level of service increase. So it's really about, in summary, becoming a more relevant service, a more useful service to more people, allowing people the choice to avoid congestion, allowing communities to avoid having to build less efficient modes of transportation, and allowing communities to build more efficient patterns of land use around. So, as I said at the top, the plan is still is finalized as a, analysis tool. But we intend to go to the operations board early this fall. And our parent commissions, also the month after, and that will be the final step in adopting the plan, and this will be out on the street, hopefully in the next couple of months, and so I'll take any final questions, Sark, I want to keep it over. But that is the system plan in a nutshell, so thank you for the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Nick? All right, awesome. Well, thank you. Well, Nick is here every TAC meeting if anyone has any further questions. So we'll move on
Thank you, Nick.
to federal function classification, item 7C.
Scrolled in.
Scroll down. Should be something. Nope, that. The transfer one. Okay, so they're updating some of the classifications for roadways, and they want to get the, they want to get the MPO's input. Why get to that screen?
Just look at this one.
Oh, gosh. All right, this is gonna be fun. So they only changed a couple with the MPO area. And these are gonna be the bigger ones. I think I notified you about this one. So this one's the Garrisonville one, is now a minor arterial. Instead of a major collector. That's one of the ones that they updated. Hold on. So that's one of the ones that they changed. That's gonna go all the way from,
Joshua Road
yeah.
and Al Grace Boulevard.
Like trying to find the name. Yeah.
So that's the 4-lane and 6-lane sections all the way to Route 1.
All that's gonna be updated. Oh, how did I do that? Okay. All right, now, oh, there was another one.
Looks like they've added
Yeah,
the end of Silly.
yeah, they added the end of this section here.
Which now exists, has been built.
Yeah.
Yeah, then. I think that was the major one that they added. That was, this shows it that,
So if we have any comments, questions, or changes we would like, should we send them directly to you or to the, I don't know if they put a comment form or anything in that email.
I mean, you can send them to me and I can send them to Marcia.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
She's in charge of the.
Okay.
At Central Office.
You know anything about the exit 140 Courthouse Road, Hospital Center Boulevard? It hasn't been updated in any of the VDOT systems yet for the diverging diamond interchange or the new road.
That's the one.
Yep. Yeah, your cursor was on it. Yeah.
And they already had made stuff, right, so knows about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that can be one of the ones.
I mean, I'd love it if that road still existed, but there's no bridge underneath, so that's the only, so I'll send you an email with that comment, with, I looked through and that was the only comment that I had on Stafford, I think, but I'll do a quick,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. Ian had one and then Mike had a question.
Yeah, I think just, we need to ask our jurisdictions to concentrate on this, just, it's a short presentation, but don't be fooled into thinking because it's such a quick presentation that it's not important.
Right.
This is a federally important process because those classifications do affect federal funding. So they only do this, make this change once every 10 years. So those of us working for our individual institutions may not be 10 years from now when this gets done again. This is the one big bang. And here's the key thing. FAMPO is going to be asked to sign off on this final project. So the final set of changes, we have to give a letter saying we approve of those changes. So make sure you concentrate on this. And if you think that the VDOT engineers have missed a particular change that you think should be made, you need to make that known like in the next month. We need to know that before we ask to give our letter endorsing the changes, right? So please, all three jurisdictions, please do go and look at this and please check that you are happy with the changes and do not see any other changes that are needed to the functional classifications of the roads in our region, because we're not going to be able to do this again for 10 years. And we have to support the list of changes that are made. Thanks.
And there are some pretty strict guidelines as to what defines each functional classification. I think that was in the email, so definitely look at that as well. Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Cassie, for bringing this to our attention. It's a big deal. And we've been looking at several roads in the city to update their classifications. I have two questions. What is the timeline on this? Ian mentioned a month. We're going through our comp plan update. We were going to really focus on this as part of the comp plan update, but maybe we need to accelerate that. What's our timeline here?
I think, Ian, right, we want to have basically by August, you guys want to do the letter of support, right?
The initial request was quite soon, but VAMPO has been pushing back across the whole state to give a little bit of extra time. But initially they wanted it all wrapped up by the beginning of September. But I think VAMPO is pushing for it to be like November. So, but don't wait. Get stuck into these things, particularly identify any roadways you think should be changed. That's the key thing. Just look at the map, look at the classifications, and if there are any you think should change, that's the list we need to have. VDOT will agree or disagree or whatever, but that's the list you're looking for. If there are any you think that should change, please send them in to Cassie and CC us, please.
Absolutely. Thank you for that timeline. That gives us some good, clear guidance on how to approach it. And my second question, we've got several proposed roadways that have been off or on from development projects or other things. I'm thinking about Gateway Boulevard, some of our more recent project concepts. How are we handling those? Do we just leave those off until they're built, or can we? Okay.
Yeah, until they're built, they can't be added on there.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. Oh, one more.
Yeah, Cassie, if we want to see kind of this map, like is this available?
Yeah, so if you go to today's meeting agenda, and then you go 7C, that VDOT statewide update to the federal functional classification. That has the email on there, and then if you scroll down, it will have a Fredericksburg link. So, and that takes you directly up. So, and that just shows basically all the roadways within Fredericksburg district. Okay.
And with regards to new roads, like is 2020 the cutoff for that?
Yeah.
Or is it more recent?
This is a census-based process, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
I think that may have answered the question, how often something to do.
Every 2 years. With the census.
Okay, let's together.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cassie. I'm sure this will come up at a future FAMPO TAC meeting again, so.
And Chris, because you were on for King George, please also look at this for your county and let me know if you have any questions or concerns with what's going. So I know you're not technically a part of the MPO, but I still want to make sure that King George is good with what's being shown for your area.
Okay.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, we will jump into item 7D, Smart Scale Round 6 presentation. A word of note, there are three resolutions on the agenda today for Jittersea, FAMPO, and local, and these are for action items. They do need to be voted on today.
wait, what? Rock Floyd in the station. on the sample mix, I think I have to do, is that what you just said? That's, okay. Okay, I was gonna pay someone. All right,
And Cassie, I responded to your email. We cannot assure you staff.
okay,
We'll jump on in his presentation.
yeah, all right. Smart scale update, summary of regional project pre-application.
Every time we see this, something gets changed in the 24 hours before the presentation. So like,
So here we're in June. The final application period has begun. By July 15th, you have to have all your supporting documentation ready, so I hope we are on the line for that. Next slide. All right, FAMPO projects, Route 1, Route 3 has screened out. We have 4 remaining projects. We are swapping one out today, which is what our little discussion here on the sidelines was about, because WIPI has decided that the Route 1 Massaponax corridor intersection improvements is not HPP. And the ever-changing environment that is smart scale round 6. So we are going to be putting in the Route 208 station project instead, and that is going to go, Massaponax is going to go on the Spotsylvania local list. Otherwise, it is as you see here.
which one are we bringing in?
What's that?
Which one are we bringing into the pepper list?
We are bringing in the 208 Smith Station. That's also a part of the pipeline study. Yeah, that one has been determined HPBL.
Okay,
Just
so it's
go,
not.
just go back one slide. So we're gonna have 2 208s on the
Yes. we
on the
are,
FAMPO list, okay?
Yes, we are.
So this list will be Butler Road, I-95, 208 Levels Road, and 208 Smith Station.
Okay, next.
And that's been allowed by OIP.
Yes.
If you include a shared use path.
Yes, which Paul has said can be done.
Okay.
So are you swapping that projects on the spot? Yeah, OIB is allowing it, that's their
They-
promise for it, because we were on Friday butting heads about what we considered HPP eligible, so that was their way of, yeah.
In their mind, they're doing us a favor.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely enthused, but anyway.
Yes. All right, next slide. What the TAC committee has to decide today is which one of the GWRC projects to recommend to the GWRC to project. So what we have here, I-95 exit Route 36. And then as you can see, we have another Route 208 pipeline study corridor. That would be everything that is encompassed in the other 2 Route 208 pipeline study
So
projects.
apologies, Carrie, just to clarify. So this project up here is the same as the 2 GWC projects, it's just combined.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
And that is allowed this year, even as it's not been allowed for the CTP.
OIB said that that was allowed if it matched exactly. Now, the thing is though, say if all of them score well.
Yeah.
Only this one would be funded. So the other 2 would not be funded, obviously. It would only be this one.
Makes sense.
So I'm not gonna make this easy. We can remove number 2 since it's on the FAMPO list. So this resolves the GWC list and FAMPO list.
So what we'll be voting on today for GWC is project number 1, project number 3, project number 4, and project number 5.
I think we can thank Spotsylvania for that because it does make our life a little bit easier. We don't have to have a big argument about it, but I think the project is covered in multiple ways, so thank you, Paul. That just saved us an hour.
Dude, I could have taken longer.
I'm sorry, Nick, do you want to restart? Do you already have any smart score projects?
No.
But score well.
In that case, Connor, you can go to the next steps slide and.
Yep.
The next step, not the next slide, but the next steps slide.
So I think it's the final.
Oh, true.
Yeah, just keep going, go.
Steps.
So I'm assuming now that we just have to slightly tweak our resolutions because the
Yes.
project lists have both actually now changed. So
Right.
the assumption is that when folks here endorse the resolutions, they're endorsing the 2 amendments we just made. So the copy online is just going to be slightly off, but I think you all know what just happened, right?
Yeah, so.
Is there anything else on?
All I want to let you know is that, above here, you guys are going to vote, and then June 17th, the policy committee, is going to do the resolution for approval. And the GWRC project. Well, I'm sorry, June 24th, GWRC board meeting, they're going to do vote on this list you guys are voting on today. And then July 15th is the deadline for all supporting documentation. That's really the real deadline. And then August 1st is basically this year, just a.
And what are you gonna need from locality staff by, I guess, July 15th? You'll send out the applications for review, all of that.
Yes,
Awesome.
yes, I'm gonna make sure you guys know everything we need to turn.
And please take that July 15th deadline seriously. If there are no exceptions, you have to have your documentation in by July the 15th. All that we're doing after that is just checking that the spelling and the grammar of documents are right. We're not going to look for more documents after July the 15th. That's it. Every piece of paper in quotation marks must be in.
So just a question on that, like on the July 15th, do you actually have to like submit the project by the 15th, or do you just have your files loaded?
We have to have it all.
Application.
We have to have it all loaded. My understanding is that last few days is just for checking that there are no errors. In other words, the documents have to all be online already in the portal, and then we can just check, oh, wait, the number of feet in the sidewalk is wrong. We're just gonna amend that number of feet or whatever. But
My understanding is that we're supposed to submit. And then VDOT is gonna be taking a look at everything and saying, hey, we still need this, it needs to be corrected. Like, past July 15th is for you guys to.
But we can't be looking for additional documents on July the 15th. We're looking whether the documents are correct and need to be amended because this is an error or a problem with the document.
Yeah, we want everything needs to be submitted by July 15th, because then we are gonna be having our week of fun, basically going through all the documentation, making sure everything's there, reviewing all the gates that are being met, make sure that we are okay with all the documentation, that those are meeting the gate needs. OIP's gonna also be checking at the same time, so that we have that like 2-week buffer of, hey, this needs to be corrected, this needs to be corrected, you're missing this, so that there's nothing being done after August 1st. That's their goal this year.
The good thing from our point of view is that we have submitted as a region the second highest number of applications this year. So some of the other regions have not used their full potential list of applications by a long shot. Don't know why that is, but it's good that we've tried to take advantage of all the slots that we have. Other people have not. Which does give us more chances to win the money, right? In this roulette game with smart scale.
So that's my presentation.
Well, there are 3 resolutions for approval. So
As amended.
Connor, could you go back to the second slide?
Second slide.
We'll just do these in order. The GWRC slide, whichever one that was. So the third slide. So resolution 2444. Do I have a motion for approval of GWRC project number 1, number 3, number 4, and number 5?
Motion to approve.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, and then Connor. Slide, and then for the FAMPO projects, we did have an amendment. Well, this would be for project number 2, 3, 5, and Route 208, Smith Station Road. Awesome.
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And then the last item is a lot easier, is resolution 2446 for the locality round 6 smart scale application. Do I have a motion for approval for that?
Motion approved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, awesome. Any
Done.
opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, that was nice and quick.
Mhm.
Well, that does not mean we are done with Smart Scale this year, but got another month or two to go, but.
This is the fastest approval since I've been
Thanks,
with
everybody.
Fanpo, so thank you, everybody.
All right, well, we'll move on to the next presentation, short presentation as well, item 7E, an update on the TAP program.
So this is just good for us. Local transportation alternatives funding selections. Next slide. So we have 3 awarded this year, Spotsylvania. They got a second award for the Chancellor Park Drive sidewalk. I believe this is a safe route to
Yay.
school, correct, Paul?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so this piece of sidewalk, go ahead if you want to say something. Okay, connects a large residential area to the elementary and middle school with a safe pedestrian facility. So this round, they were awarded 625,000. That's 500,000 with a 10% match, and their previous funding was 2.5 million. So the project total budget is 3.25 million, and that's funded. Next slide. They also won an award for the Smith Station Road Shared Use Path Gap Closure. This closes the gap in several miles of shared use path from east of I-95 to east of Court. That's a pretty long stretch.
I have a quick question, Paul. Are these gonna be locally administered or they're gonna be done by VDOT?
With TAP projects, I think the only option is to do locally.
Okay, so they'll be locally
We're-
administered.
We've always locally administered TAPs.
Sounds good? Awesome.
administering tap.
Sure.
Which one?
Trail.
That's the one that was connected to the Smart Scale project.
Yeah.
That was kind of before our time.
But well, I'm about to say you don't have to locally administer because the next one. King George sidewalk, King George has applied to have VDOT administer this for them. So this one was a Ready, Set, Go. Project, which, so they had won basically a Get Ready grant for this one. This replaces a ditch area marked by heavy desire lines between the intersection and the middle school with a sidewalk. That's Dahlgren Road and Route 3. So they got 300, sorry.
1,000.
Yeah. Like that, yeah. I'm like, I'm doing that in a hurry. That is most definitely 357,000.
We'll take the millions if they'll give it to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that sidewalk?
I could build you that. Okay, sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very connected with this project. It is not a million. Forgive me, guys.
And Carrie, if I may add, this is a part of the work program. It started with that in part.
Yes, yeah. This is part of the rural work program. I wish it was a million. I was getting excited there. Yeah, 1,000. So yes, this is gonna make a nice little sidewalk connection from the middle school to the intersection there. So, the kids can go over sheets and fix up. So, there you go. Congratulations, everybody.
Yes, congratulations to King George and Spotsylvania.
That's it.
Also, while we're congratulating everybody, also congratulations to Stafford for getting their, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but the award for the,
Yeah.
oh, is it there? I'll say.
You're
that.
excited, jumping ahead.
No, I'm just glad that we're getting funds for projects. It's good.
All right, we'll move on to item F, election of officers. So this is the election of officers for the chair and vice chair. We follow a rotation. So I believe this time will be Spotsylvania coming up.
Chair, and then we have to elect a vice chair from
And a second
the
vice
city
chair.
of Fredericksburg, and then a second vice chair from Stafford.
So I guess we're looking for nominations for chair first. I think you can nominate
So
yourself.
for chair, basically myself was the one.
And then the city for vice chair. Oh,
Yes, vice chair from the city.
Jackson.
Now, unless you are interested. Okay.
It's Jackson.
all right. And then I guess I'll nominate myself as second vice chair.
So just for the minutes, can we just read aloud?
Yep, so
Those
the
names.
nominations are Paul Anello for chair, Jamie Jackson for vice chair, and Matthew Lahane for second vice chair for FY 25.
And we need to vote.
All right,
We-
motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And then item D, 7G.
So I was actually gonna do this one. I just wanted to thank Matthew Lahane for his
Thank you.
service as the chair of FAMPO.
No, thank you.
All right, so Paul will be taking over as chair come our August TAC meeting. So then we'll move on to item 8, correspondence, SS4A letter of support from VDOT.
This letter received from Commissioner Fritsch with Wakey's to ask for such. No other action is required on this.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. And then with that, we'll move on to staff reports.
We are recruiting for a new public engagement officer. Our public engagement officer has taken a position with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And so we are recruiting and advertising at the moment. We are busy conducting interviews. We'll let you know if anything new develops. Is there anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, I think that's it.
All right, awesome. We'll then move on to member reports. Items A, B, and C. C, we discussed the new TAP projects. And then Stafford did get awarded the Safe Streets for All planning and grant for the Safe Streets for All plan and a bike ped plan.
So now I can say congratulations.
Yes. So it's $650,000 for both the plans.
Yeah, your bike ped plan.
Yep, yeah, it was updated in 1996, 2019. now.
2019, yeah.
Yes.
I was part of the 2019. I thought it was 1976. No.
I have the hard copy from 1996.
Yes, Ryan.
Yep. And then any further notifications of new projects, changes in funding, anything else under member reports? The link is, I guess, for the VDOT public meeting, just the additional project changes to funding in the
Paul, did you want to make any comments on these or?
What I submitted, I think a few weeks ago was basically just our TAP and our revenue sharing projects. Forget if I said maybe the more roundabout, which is 70 or 60 plan.
It's very useful to know when jurisdictions have got new projects or new funding on existing projects. It helps us to know kind of regionally what's going on, particularly when we start with studies, so that we don't have, studies making recommendations that conflict with your particular locality plans, right? So that's quite useful information. Please do share with us when you have new projects or new funding for projects that can move ahead. Then we know.
All right, anything else under member reports? With that,
Well, hold on.
Nathan, go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to make a comment because I missed it during staff reports. If, I just want to say thank you to all the jurisdictions that provided input on the system plan. I think we met with just about everyone. If you want a briefing or a certain body or board or commission in your jurisdiction wants a briefing, reach out to me directly. We're happy to do it. And if you want to coordinate on like areas of future study, also reach out to me. Happy to do it.
Leon at Caroline County,
Okay.
and you should probably have a coffee about future plans.
That's cryptic.
They are definitely, in their 20-year plan is most definitely a gas station.
Or
And they,
passenger rail.
passenger rail, and they know where they're going to put it and Carmel Church.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do they know how they're going to pay for it?
I think they're getting land donated.
they are getting.
And I don't know about the construction.
That development moving.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's been on the books for
Yeah.
decades, like,
Almost.
been in the statewide rail plan, like 3 iterations.
Okay,
It's right around the curve. Go-
that's good. Thank you for letting me know that. I appreciate it.
Okay, and if it's not viable, you need to have that conversation so that they can look at buses or whatever.
Paul?
So the one quick question is what calendar, like, the calendar from like FY 25 out?
Well, we don't do our calendars by financial year, we do them by calendar year.
Okay.
So that the calendar is running until December, and then what we typically do is out of October, we propose a draft for the next calendar year. So they follow calendar years, not financial years, so it's still got all the dates in until December.
That's good.
All right, awesome. Any further member reports?
And it's on the website.
Yep.
All right, with that, we'll, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good, good.